Welcome all. Thank you all for joining the Australian AI Network's first inaugural event. Where is the money? Where is the money in AI flowing? It's fantastic to have everyone here. And in particular, I think the importance of this event can't be understated, in particular from the perspective of coming out of COVID, coming out of some economic challenges, and coming into a scenario where growth, in particular in the tech sector, is going to be really important for Australia's recovery. So this is a fantastic event. I've seen the decks coming into it. I'm super excited. I think we've got some amazing content, amazing speakers, and I'm really looking forward to it. Let me just quickly introduce myself for those of you who haven't met me. Most of the people on this call I think I've met before or I've talked to at some point. I'm Evan Shellshear. I'm the head of analytics at Biarri. My background is one in developing software systems, in particular in areas of robotics, in optimization, machine learning, and a variety of other applications. And this is quite a topic that's very dear to me and close to my heart. In terms of everyone who's on the call, just a couple of really quick house rules. If you're not talking, please do keep yourself on mute. It'll keep it less distracting for everyone else. But I haven't forced everyone to be on mute for the whole call, merely because at the end of this call, we're going to have a bit of a discussion. I want some people to tell their own stories about funding their companies and the different funding work that they've gotten into over the years. So looking forward to having a bit of conversation towards the end of this and hearing what people's experiences are. But let's get straight into it. The first thing I'd like to do is first of all say there's been a little change of plans. We've got Katrina Wallace had something on today, so unfortunately she's not able to make it to represent Boab AI. But we've got someone just as fantastic and who I'm equally excited to welcome today. That's Andrew Lai. So Andrew, welcome to the talk today.
Thanks very much.
Andrew, you're going to talk a bit about Boab a little bit later, but could you just give a really quick 1-minute overview of yourself and kind of where you come from for those of you who haven't met you on the call?
Sure, no worries. So I'm Andrew Lai. I'm the Managing Director of Boab AI. I started as a decision analytics manager in financial services, did that for about 7 years, but had enough of corporate and ran a fintech for a while, but an opportunity came up to run a venture capital fund. So we helped to kick off the agricultural technology movement in Australia, invested in 19 teams through SproutX, and yeah, worked for a little bit at Deakin University as well as a ventures director. So this is probably the third ecosystem that I'm working on, from fintech to agtech and now AI.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Andrew. Our second speaker we're going to have today is Simon Lucey, and he's someone I'm super excited to have here. Simon, welcome to the talk today.
Thanks so much for having us, Evan. Yeah, I'm the director of the Australian Institute of Machine Learning in Adelaide, University of Adelaide. And previous to that, I was a tenured professor at Carnegie Mellon University, teaching sort of AI and computer vision. And I also worked for 3.5 years as a principal research scientist at an autonomous vehicle startup called Argo AI. So thanks so much for having me and really looking forward to the event.
Thank you for joining us. And finally, our special guest that will be revealed now, that was in the announcement, but no one knew who it was. It's someone who's done some fantastic work. Super excited that she's here today. And I'm really glad that we could get her along to tell us a bit about her journey. It's Michelle Perugini. Michelle, welcome to the talk.
Hi, thanks, Evan. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be talking today. My background's in the health and medical sciences, spent around a decade as a research scientist in the oncology sector, and I've now founded 2 global AI tech businesses, one which was in a whole range of different industry sectors using unique behavioural AI technologies to model consumer behaviour and uptake of new products and response to new policies, a whole range of different, global locations and industries there, and then sold that company to EY in 2015 and founded Presagen, which I'm now the co-founder and CEO of, in end of 2016, started 2017. And we're really focused on the healthcare sector, women's health in particular, and applying AI to solve some critical women's health issues like you'll hear about a little bit later. But yeah, super keen to talk about the investment ecosystem here and some of the challenges and some of the good things and our experiences.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Michelle. So as you've all heard, awesome lineup of speakers today. Really excited to get in. I don't want to hold this up anymore. So I'm just going to say, here's the way it's going to run. Andrew's going to give a quick overview of Boab AI and how he sees the market. Then he's going to do that for about 15 minutes. Simon Lucey's going to jump in and let us know what his perspective is, in particular coming back from the States and working with Argo AI, which I'm really excited to hear about. And then at the end, we'll hear from Michelle, her journey, and she'll tell us a bit about her company and then just talk through a little bit of her experiences, just a bit of a personal story there. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrew. Andrew, I'm going to start sharing my screen now, and we shall kick off as soon as you're ready. When you need me to change slides, I'll just change the slide. So over to you, Andrew.
Thanks a lot, Evan. So yeah, just a quick intro on Boab. It's an initiative of Artesian Venture Partners. So Artesian is Australia's most active venture investor in Australia, over 500 investments so far and over 450 million funds under management. In terms of Boab AI, I suppose it's the latest initiative for investing in AI companies. So our commitment is at a minimum of 32 AI companies to invest in at 300 grand each. And in addition to the scale up program, we're raising a $100 million venture capital fund that we hope to fund another 150 companies. So the investment environment is obviously something we're very interested in. And yeah, we are hungry for deals. So I hope to share perhaps a little bit of my own learnings, and very keen to learn from the other speakers as well. So Evan, if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. So I think it's important to realize that Australia's share of global AI venture funding is actually quite small. So the stats that I've received over here are from PitchBook. Australia's share of global AI funding is actually 0.29% of the global venture funding. And compared with Australia's GDP, the share of GDP, world share of GDP, which is 1.8%, it's approximately 1/6 of where you would expect it to be. So the chart that I've just got over there helps to put that into perspective. The vast majority of deals are done in the United States. So we've currently got 59% over there. China's about 15%. And then the rest of the world, which Australia obviously inhabits, is 26%. So by and large, the story of AI investment internationally is a story of the USA and China. And obviously we think there's great opportunities within Australia and the Asia Pac region, and that's what we're keen to change. Next slide, please, Evan. And so in terms of venture deals per capita, Australia is probably in the middle area. So we've currently got, on a US dollar perspective over there, Australia sitting in the middle at about $2 per person. US obviously at the top over there, and we've got Hong Kong and Singapore, which obviously within Asia Pacific. But then even though China does, I suppose, take the majority of the second most AI venture deals in the world, because of its large population on a per capita basis, it's still relatively low. And then we've got New Zealand on there as well. So yeah, it is quite interesting. And even though there is a lot of talk about Australia perhaps upping the amount of venture funding, it is still, I suppose, middle range perhaps. And you know, obviously there's a lot more to go in terms of catching up to some of the other nations within Asia Pacific, and also with the US in particular. Next slide, please, Evan. So this chart does show that there has been increases from 2016 to 2019, and I haven't updated this for 2020 yet, but obviously 2020 will be a little bit higher, I believe. And currently, from 2016, it grew from $3 million through to $52 million in 2019. So there has been growth, but as per some of the previous slides over there, you can sort of see it's still quite low in comparison. And the growth in AI venture deals internationally has been a lot higher than the growth in AI venture deals within the Australia region. Next slide, please, Evan. And this is the statistic that I had mentioned before. And 2020, the statistic that we have of Australia's share of global AI venture deals is currently sitting at 0.29%. And you can see it's actually even though the total amount of dollars being allocated to AI venture deals has gone up, I suppose, tremendously as per the previous slide, you can see as a percentage of the share of global AI funding, it's actually been decreasing. And that's simply because, primarily in the USA and also China as well, in 2018, the increase in AI venture deals in those regions has been absolutely tremendous. And the growth in AI venture deals internationally is a lot higher than the growth has been within the Australia region. So as I mentioned before, it's around 1/6 of where you would expect Australia's venture funding would be. So sorry if I'm coming off a little bit pessimistic over here. Obviously, I'm a great champion and I'm a great proponent of Australian AI venture deals, but I just wanted to, be upfront with some of the statistics that we have over here, and I suppose the challenge that is before us. Next slide, please, Evan. And I thought it'd be worthwhile to also just break it down by state. So once again, this is data from PitchBook, and as they've categorized it on AI, and this is for all venture deals from 2006 to 2020. And I believe there are some outliers over there that make New South Wales tremendously larger, but overall New South Wales is definitely the region to be at for AI venture deals. Victoria, at least from that time period, is number 3. And then I believe in 2020, since then, there have been some large venture deals, AI venture deals within Victoria. So Victoria's probably overtaking Queensland at the moment. I do need to update that's this slide to the most recent data. But it is quite fascinating to see that essentially New South Wales does as many AI venture deals as does the rest of the states combined. So I thought that quite fascinating, and certainly from a Victorian perspective, we're keen to catch up to New South Wales, and I'm sure the other states are as well. And Evan, just checking, do I have any other slides after this, or is that the last slide?
No, I think that's the last slide. So that's it.
Great. Well, I'm happy to just make a few notes and just sort of talk about what I've noticed, aside from the statistics, the AI statistics. And look, in general, we do find that there's incredible value within the Australian region. For comparable deals in the US, the valuations are probably more than half of what they are in the US. So from a venture investor perspective, I think there's a lot of great opportunities, but at the moment it is still very much an investor's market, I would suppose, because of the dearth of investors. So it does make things a little bit more competitive for the AI companies, and probably puts a bit more focus on bootstrapping and also being capital efficient. But yeah, there's definitely pros on that side, but there's cons as well. So certainly I think Australia's got a little bit further to go, and the more funding that we can get just helps the ecosystem. So certainly we take the view that the rising tide floats all boats. So look, anyone that's doing deals in the region, anyone that's investing in AI companies locally, that are, whether it's as a VC fund or angels or high net worths, we very much welcome them to the space and encourage them to participate.
That's fantastic, Andrew. I think there's some really good insights there from my perspective, seeing what I've seen. What I'll do is I'll push questions to the end that people may have, but your comment there around bootstrapping and how to get funding is extremely relevant, because the next person, Simon, who we're going to hear from here, is going to talk about topics very close to that. So Simon, without further ado, because I want to give us as much time to talk at the end, I might kick straight off into your talk, if that's okay, because there's some fascinating insights in this.
Sure. And thanks so much, and really enjoyed Andrew's talk beforehand. Hopefully it connects somewhat. My connection's a little bit different. Obviously, I'm sort of coming back, I'm sort of more at the fundamental research end of AI. And so that's been sort of my background, although I've had a lot to do with companies and startups and things. So hopefully that you guys can find some value in what I'm about to say. I guess I got kind of lumped with where the AI money is in the US. I don't have necessarily the statistics that sort of Andrew was floating around. in that regard, but I think it was great that he included sort of how Australia related to the US in there too. So hopefully you guys have got a bit of an idea on that. But maybe we can go to the first slide, Evan. So I guess when I was asked to sort of put together some thoughts or some talking points on this, I basically kind of went back to earlier in my career, and I was involved in 1 or 2 startups early off. I've been mostly a researcher during my life, but in the early 2010s, I was involved in sort of a startup that was trying to kind of do very similar to kind of some of the stuffy things like Snapchat and other things where you had like a facial avatar, we could track faces and change identities and things. And so we were very much sort of at the beginning parts of that. And so we were sort of went through the whole venture capital type thing, like had a startup and kind of, and my experience at the time was that we had one or a couple of talented programmers, like sort of like gun programmers that could put together sort of a nice application. We had sort of a business plan for it. The startup costs were really, really low. Basically all we needed were sort of iPhones and iPads, maybe some computers, and the real sort of motivating thing that was sort of motivating the viability of the business was basically that the world was suddenly getting ubiquitous access to the internet and broadband. And so all of a sudden, all these capabilities were sort of possible on smartphones and things. And so in some ways, I kind of view that as the previous tech wave that sort of happened. There's a lot of innovation that came across there. Obviously, different types of businesses came up in the 2010s, and I don't mean to generalize too much, but just sort of talking about my own experience. So what's interesting, actually, I went off to the US, and I spent about 7 years in the US as a tenured professor at a place called Carnegie Mellon University. In the US, it's reasonably well known. In Australia, it's probably less known, but it's basically the #1 school in the US for sort of AI and robotics. And we sort of battle it out with Stanford and MIT, and depending on who you talk to, we're the best or the other people are the best. But what was really interesting there is, we can go to the next slide, Evan, is I arrived there just as the AI boom was sort of happening. And I'm sure you guys have been keeping up with a lot of the AI stories about sort of, there's a great book out recently on sort of the history of this last 10 years with sort of Jeff Hinton and all these guys, and the big explosion of AI. So I was at CMU while that was all happening. And this tech wave that we're undergoing at the moment, at least when I was in the US, seemed very different to the wave I was in previously. So in this wave, what was required is that a lot of the things that were being explored, at least what I was involved in, were extremely capital intensive, very different to what I went through before. You needed very large groups of top scientists from the top schools in AI. And so basically, like, there was a bidding war in the early 2010s just to get access to these people, and it hasn't stopped. So, so what's happening is that you're having to kind of pay mind-boggling amounts to actually just get access to anyone with sort of the top tier AI experience. And so that in itself is extremely capital intensive, as opposed to just having like sort of great engineers and programmers. The other thing that sort of happened too is that the hardware costs are now astronomical. If you want to do anything sort of in terms of sort of innovating AI, rather than just applying AI to a new product, but like innovating in the AI space, you need to have custom-made chips, billion-dollar data centers. And basically only the richest companies in the world have access to these. And so again, I don't want to be pessimistic either, but this is really happening. The other thing that sort of I noticed that's happening is AI is fundamentally a data proposition. So previously, like in the startup I went through, we had patents, we had a business plan. With the AI wave, it's very much about data, especially access to labeled data. And I've sort of got this, I got this from Axios, I think, this little figure here of sort of people plowing the fields, the digital fields. And essentially it's very much like that. I was working for an autonomous car company, and we would get sort of like huge amounts of data, but people would have to physically sit down and annotate it and click on points and other things such that the AI algorithm had something to learn with. And that is expensive. And that is another barrier to entries, because the people with the biggest data sets have an ability to protect their space rather than sort of patents and other things. And so that's one thing that I've noticed that's very, very different to this current tech wave. And I think a lot of people in the know here in Australia sort of understand this, but people at the higher level, say in government and just in business in general, don't really appreciate how different this wave is to the previous wave. And the thinking is quite different. And so if we can go to the next slide, Evan. So as a result, because of this, what's happened in the US, and I've had sort of firsthand knowledge of this, is you have the big five. The big five basically have a monopoly or on AI research in many ways, because they're the ones that are attracting all the talent. So all the graduates, say, coming out of CMU with an AI degree, especially PhD talent, they get sucked straight up into the big five. And if we click on the next one, Evan, a little animation to kind of go there. So what's been happening in the US is only the richest companies can afford to really innovate in AI. And what I want to be really at pains to say this. There's two different aspects. There's innovating AI for sort of like a business, and there's also sort of taking existing AI techniques and applying them to your domain. And they're two different propositions. And so what I'm talking about is innovating an AI component rather than taking existing models and applying it to an existing application. So what's been happening is that the top AI universities, and mine included, are basically being hollowed out from within by these companies. So when I was at CMU, probably in 2015, there was a raid by Uber. Uber went and took a third of our faculty, just came in overnight and took them, and they were gone. And so very, very disruptive. And so nearly all US professors, nearly all my colleagues have joint appointments in industry. And I was the same. I had a joint appointment in industry for about 4 years before I left. And that's just standard. Like there's almost something wrong with you if you don't. Like saying, why aren't you having a joint appointment? Another thing we noticed too is that as a result, in the university sector, we almost don't talk to SMEs because they can't pay enough. The students are not interested. They're just talent starved. They can't get access to them. And so it's a real issue. And sometimes we work with other I think that's actually a really bad thing for the US in the long term. And so we've been trying to work out ways to kind of stop that happening. But that's the reality of what's happening over there as far as I could see. And so another thing too is that if you are doing a startup in AI, and so with the company I was working for, and I'll get to that very, very soon, what tends to happen too is that the AI startups that are in existence, they do get bought out, and there is venture capital around, but they get bought out not for the IP, they get bought out for the talent. So basically, sometimes the IP gets thrown out and they just hire the engineers or the talent just to get those people. And so, yeah, again, and the big thing is not the algorithms, it's the talent acquisition and the data. They're the big things, in my experience, that really mattered with respect to AI at the moment. So we'll keep going. Just one quick example of that. You guys might have heard of a new natural language processing model called GPT-3. I'm not going to bore you with it, but it's based on this new branch of deep learning called transformer networks. So BERT, other things like that. So to give you guys an example, it blew the world's mind back in late 2020 over all the things it could do. But a person actually went and estimated if you were to personally try to train GPT-3 on sort of like an Amazon instance, it would cost you, just to train it once, it would cost you $4.6 million. So like just mind blowing. So the days of someone sitting in their garage and training up a neural network that can outperform what the big five can do are sort of gone in that respect. And so it really is a challenge over sort of what's the path forward? How do we go forward if we're serious about innovating in AI? And the IP is very, very difficult to protect. I've got Paul Dolby on the line here with me. He's involved with me at AML, and we almost just don't even bother patenting things in AI anymore. It's the data that really matters. And our product, in a way, is the people, our students and the faculty. That's the product that we have. If we keep on going. And then quickly, my own experience, I was a principal research scientist in my hybrid appointment at Argo AI. Many people in Australia don't know Argo AI. It was formed in 2017. It had $1 billion in backing from Ford. And that was to the point you couldn't make a play in this space unless you had deep pockets. And so the other thing that's happening is old money is trying to come in and back AI startups because you need that amount of capital just to kind of battle with the big five. In 2020, VW bought a $2.6 billion stake. And so at the moment, it's a 40-40-20 split between the founders and the other components. And they purposely set up shop in Pittsburgh next to CMU to get access to the talent. And so got a picture there of myself and one of my colleagues at CMU, David Ramanan, who's a really famous AI professor. Yeah, we were snapped up with a couple other people from Georgia Tech into that company. And again, just sort of the nature of the business, it's very, very capital intensive. And my final slide, again, not to be too controversial. And if you look up sort of top AI startups in the USA at the moment, Argo AI is considered a startup. It's got like $3.6 billion in funding. It's a startup. And that's sort of like the example. And if you look through the list, they're examples of sort of what's happening in that space. And then my final summary slide. So I'm starting to notice similar patterns here in Australia. Obviously, sort of it's a different environment, different scale. And one of the things, again, I don't want to be too pessimistic because I do think there is a way forward. We currently don't have a big five ecosystem to support the AI innovation that the US is sort of leaning on. And there really is a need and a role for the Australian government and universities to help startups, to actually kind of give Australia that AI innovation that these businesses can go out and kind of generate revenue and really attack the world. And one of the reasons I came back to the US, came back to Australia, which is a sort of a great news story that a lot of people don't know, is the institute that I'm at, we're actually ranked 3rd in the world for computer vision, which is a part of AI. And so ahead of MIT, ahead of Berkeley, ahead of Stanford. And so that's one of the reasons I came back. There's a real opportunity here at the moment because for AI to work, at least I've noticed, is there has to be a really good connection between a fundamental sort of backer, whether that's the government or the big five, talented researchers like we have in the university sector, and then people that are hungry to then take those outputs and put them into sort of commercial ventures throughout the country and throughout the world. And hopefully this wasn't too controversial, but that's my time.
Absolutely fascinating, Simon. I think we're gonna have to stop it there so we give Michelle enough time to talk. That was an amazing talk. That was just awesome to hear that perspective and understand what was happening overseas. Michelle, do you want to share your screen and jump into it from your side? I just want to make sure we get a little bit of time for people to talk and ask questions at the end.
I do. Let me just... so I guess just as sort of a really brief intro, and I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at Presagen and with one of our products. I'm so sorry, but I am going to disagree with some of what Simon said because I don't think you need billion-dollar data centers. I also don't think it's necessarily all about the data. I think we're in a new wave of the new wave of AI, and I think that new wave is innovating around how we make the technology more scalable, more efficient, how we collect the right type of data, how we build these technologies in an innovative way so that we can be more capital efficient with their build. But then by the same token, I also do agree that they are capital intensive in many ways. And so there is an investment requirement, and some of those stats that Andrew mentioned are horrifying. And we've experienced them personally. And I think it's really important to kind of understand the contextual landscape in which we're operating in this space and how we can kind of innovate around it and how we can leverage what we do have and build successful companies despite those kind of situations that we're in. But let me just first tell you a little bit about what we're doing. At Presagen, we are an AI healthcare company that has a focus on building scalable AI products, and we've got a specific focus in the women's health sector, and there's a whole range of reasons for that. But there's a lot of synergies in women's health. It's a really interesting area for outcomes. It's been massively underserved from both a technology but also an investment perspective, and it's a huge emerging growth area. Scalable products, I guess, scalability of AI has not really been seen to be that effective. Everyone's focused on the big data problem. Everyone's focused on a big data land grab. How much data can I get? What can I do with that data? Deriving insights from it. I think that's changing. I think there's now a broad appreciation that it's all about the right data. How do you collect the right data to be able to do to solve a particular problem space? We are still very much in the application layer of kind of developing specific products for AI, but I think there's also some really unique underpinning innovation in how we collect data, how we collaborate around collecting that data, and how we get the right diversity of data in order to make these products scale. So we're all about understanding how do we collect globally diverse data sets that represent different, in our healthcare sector, different patient demographics, different clinical settings, because if you can do that, you can create products that can be deployed out of the box and don't need extensive retraining or re-wrangling every time you go to a new clinical environment. But there's many challenges in the healthcare sector that don't necessarily exist in other industries for AI. Data privacy laws prevent the movement of data across countries. So it's very difficult to get that diversity and get all of that data in the one spot so that you can train an AI algorithm. Clinical collaboration is an issue. Data's locked up in all of these different distributed clinical environments, and it's difficult to get those clinical providers to give that data away for free, let alone in a good quality, such that you don't need to spend millions of dollars wrangling it to get it ready. And data quality is a huge issue in every industry, but particularly in healthcare. Clinical data is inherently poor quality and it really hampers the ability to create AI products. We're developing a really unique concept around what we call the social network for healthcare. It's kind of changing the way that medical data from around the world is connected to AI to make that AI more scalable, more affordable and accessible for patients at global scale. It's a big vision, and we're essentially building kind of what is almost like a social media model or a YouTube model where we connect this global network of clinics. They provide the diverse medical data. We produce products. We deploy those products back through the clinics for free. They use them to service patients and patients pay for the service. But of course, the patients are the beneficiaries of those services, and because the products are scalable, they pay at a very low cost. So it kind of serves all of the needs of that whole kind of ecosystem. But what I want to do quickly is to shift into a product that we've kind of demonstrated the scalability of this type of approach and platform with, and that is Life Whisperer. So Life Whisperer is using artificial intelligence for embryo assessment during the IVF process. So when you go through IVF, basically you create embryos in a culture dish, and a doctor needs to select which embryo to transfer back to the female in order to be able to achieve a pregnancy. That process is extraordinarily subjective. It's very limited in its accuracy, and we can use computer vision and machine learning to be able to assess images of those embryos and get a better assessment of their likelihood of achieving pregnancy. So we do aim to be the leading AI solution across the IVF process. We're not a fertility business, but we do have a number of fertility products that we're already demonstrating at global scale. So the first one is embryo viability assessment, predicting pregnancy. That's already in market globally. Embryo genetics is a product that we're launching shortly, and it's going through reg approvals at the moment. That's about non-invasively assessing genetic integrity of embryos just through using computer vision and AI, and there's a whole range of other applications. So again, selecting the healthiest embryo in IVF is critical to a successful pregnancy outcome. And what we built is essentially a software-based application that can use AI to identify that embryo quality. Just for context, we kind of built this collaboratively with clinics all around the world. They contributed data in a pre-specified format onto our platform. We then used that data, embryo images and pregnancy outcomes, to train a model. And then we, did all the clinical validation testing, regulatory approvals in around 60% of the global marketplace. And we now have initial users globally. Product works out of the box, scalable, any clinical environment. We can set up clinics in India or Southeast Asia or Europe within about 2 minutes, and they can get up and running and using the system. So it's a very different world we live in now. Everything's on demand, where we don't have $1 billion data center. We use AWS on-demand cloud services, and we use very sophisticated optimization algorithms that we've developed to utilize their kind of spot pricing and on-demand pricing protocols. And it's actually a really cost-efficient way of us delivering and training these products. Patients are already having babies by virtue of our technology, which is super exciting. And of course, the benefits are around, you know, improved patient outcomes and non-invasive objective assessment of embryos. So I'm going to stop there because I do want to launch into, I wanted to give you that kind of overview of what we're doing as a company, but I do want to launch into just a couple of points, if you'll allow me to, Evan, around kind of my funding experience in this space.
Absolutely. That's what we want to hear.
Yeah, so, you know, we are a company with a huge, bold vision. That's very difficult to do in Australia in the AI space, let alone in the healthcare space. We have kind of a massive deficit of funding for AI companies like ours that want to achieve global scale. What I would say is that the early stage funding is there. So I think it's quite easy for companies with interesting products and concepts and ideas to be able to get funded at that early stage. And, you know, if funds like Boab AI, for example, are really helping with that kind of process of early stage funding. And I think that's a hugely important component. But one of the challenges is when companies get to our stage and we require tens of millions of dollars funding to be able to now scale our technologies globally, to be able to build the infrastructure globally to deliver on this big vision of creating multiple products, that takes tens of millions of dollars. And I think, if I'm correct in saying, Andrew mentioned that in 2016 there was $3 million of AI funding, and now it's in 2019 it was 52 million. That's a pretty big component for one company's need to require half of what was the entire of 2019's funding for this area. So it is a big problem, and a lot of those investors are in the US. And I think there's even a kind of bigger problem that we have here is that, you know, we're thinking too small because we need to be too capital efficient, which means that we're trying to bootstrap things, which means we can't do the big vision kind of, you know, underpinning innovative technology plays that you can do, you know, if you have kind of the big bucks of the US. So it is a significant issue. I think whilst infrastructure has become kind of, you know, is expensive, we do have greater access to a whole range of on-demand infrastructure now that I think can make it easier for companies to get started and get up and running. But the reality is that to build these things and deploy them at global scale, which is what you need to be commercially viable, it's quite difficult, and it still takes capital. So I'd be really keen to kind of open up to specific questions and yeah, and invite the rest of the speakers in.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Michelle. Really appreciate it. I think there was also some really good insights to counterpose kind of a little bit of what Simon said. We've already got some questions in the chat, but what I want to do is I want a few people to talk a little bit about their journeys. There's some names and faces I recognize here, and I don't want to give it just to the people that have potentially been successful or unsuccessful, but I'd like to get a bit of a mix. So I know, Jeremy, you're on this call. Did you want to maybe give us a couple minutes of your journey, given you've been to the States and now you're back again?
Yeah.
What are you seeing in relation to what you've heard today?
Well, mate, just one thing to mention that I don't think I've ever actually mentioned before anywhere is I had a company called Analytic, which was a deep learning and medicine company. It was actually the first one. And I did when I did a Series A for that, I raised, just trying to think, it was 15 million. That was a pre-revenue company. And nearly every dollar of that came from Australian investors. And I don't think any of those dollars would appear in any of Andrew's charts because, well, A, because it was an American company, and B, because it was all from corporate and family offices. So just between us, 2 million of it was from the Lowy family. And literally, I was just doing a talk, I think it was at a Singularity University thing, and talked about the company I was starting up, and the, you know, the Lowies came over to me afterwards and were like, you know, how, and I said there's a little bit of angel opportunity. We've already done most of the funding. And they're like, how much opportunity is in the angel opportunity? I was like, oh, we're setting aside like $2 million for angels. They're just like, okay, can we do all of it? And that was just like that. And I was like, okay. And that was it. There was no like DD or whatever. They just cared about the mission and they wanted to be involved. So like, I think there's a big opportunity to jump into like all that wealth from retail, mining, agriculture, you know, maybe directly, because the other investors in that Series A was Capital Radiology, which they don't think they'd ever invested in anything before. They're a publicly listed radiology company, and they're just like, okay, this is a technology we want to use. And then, yeah, for Kaggle, Anthony and I went over to the US and basically, again, pre-revenue. You know, Anthony was our smooth guy. So he went to the US and managed to line up 5 basically discussions with fairly top tier VCs. And I told him if he did that, then I would go and, you know, write a deck and pitch and do the financial model and whatever. So then, yeah, from there, we just spent 2 months basically jumping from one to the other, building as much momentum as we could. You know, fear of missing out is the biggest driver of VC dollars we found in San Francisco Bay Area. So we kind of tried to really be, you know, as public and as hot as we could. And yeah, we raised, I think it was 10, 11 million. Yeah, with neither of us had any track record particularly. I mean, I had the Aussie startups I had done, but neither of us had raised money before in the US. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that there's, particularly in the US, there's money available. And it definitely, the thing we found was every VC we spoke to in the US would ask us what would happen if we raised a lot more money than we asked for. So we started out asking for 500 grand. And I remember like Mark Andreessen said like to us, well, what if we gave you 5 million? What would you do? So there's always a sense in the US, and that kind of happened a lot. So then when we pitched for Node Khosla, he actually came to our co-working space and he said, and everybody knows each other, so he already knew what's going on. He said, oh, I heard Mark offered you 5 million. What if we gave you another 5 million? And we're just like, Jesus, this is so different. Because like in Australia, it's always like, what would you do with 1/10 of the money? You know, you asked for $1 million. What would you do with like $5? You know, it's always like thinking smaller. So yeah, there's a very big cultural difference, and the availability of money changes a lot. Like exactly like Michelle was saying, you know, it's all about thinking globally. So I'm keen to help support the Aussie ecosystem, but honestly, at the moment, it's very hard not to advise entrepreneurs and say just go to San Francisco because that's where the money and the vision is at the moment.
That's very interesting, Jeremy. Thanks for that. I mean, it's you've got a wealth of experience there, so it's really interesting to hear that journey and how you've gone. You were quite successful over the different ventures, in particular, Fast AI that you founded as well has been massively successful. But I want to get a couple of people just to talk who've kind of been struggling that journey. And Lucey, I saw you were on the call too, and I hope you don't mind me throwing you under the bus. Do you want to tell us a bit about your challenges in your journey, if you could talk to kind of trying to raise money for yourself?
Sure. Thanks for telling me that I'm one of the non-successful ones. No, just kidding. For those that don't know me, I'm Lucey Leitner. I'm co-founder of Lyra Robotics, and I've been with the Australian Centre for Robotic Vision, which actually also worked with AIML and the University of Adelaide before, so where Simon is right now. And so we came into the startup world by actually building technology at university that is world leading. So we built a robotic system that was not just significantly cheaper than an MIT, Princeton, Mitsubishi, Toshiba entry, but actually outcompeted them also in terms of capabilities. And so from that point of view, really, you know, coming from an academic point of view, we started looking at where we can apply that technology, and it's specifically in robotics, so smart robotic systems, where we can apply that in sectors that actually make sense. And so we found a few verticals where that makes sense. And you know, given Australia, we looked at some of those potential avenues where that makes sense. So agriculture is one, e-commerce and logistics is clearly another one, especially given the the times that we live in right now. But sort of our struggle was really, so as Jeremy just said, like, we said we probably need $1.5 to $2 million. We have, a bunch of people with PhDs, a bunch of smart people that know how to make robotic systems work, of which there is not many in the world. And we have potential 2-3 customer application areas that are super exciting. And basically every Aussie VC said like, yeah, no, show us the revenue first. Like this is not something that we know of. This is not something that we care. This is not something where we have, the funding to translate that technology into a product. Luckily, we actually found an overseas investor. So we got a Japanese investor on board, and that basically allowed us to do that product development. But right now we're basically at the same stage again, where we're talking to US investors, and they're asking us, okay, cool, you're raising 1.5. What if we give you 5? What can you do? And at the same time, we're talking to Aussie investors, and they say we're raising 1.5. And first of all, they go like, and then they basically ask you if you can do it with $150,000. So that's really a struggle. And as sort of Jeremy said, I mean, we can think globally, and we should think globally. Simon said it as well. There's labs here that are world leading. It's a question of how we transfer that into application areas that can go into the world. And for us, actually going to the US is an opportunity, but actually there's less roboticists in the Bay Area that we can hire than there are in Brisbane, right? So so that is actually a significant advantage of being here, and US investors partly understand that, but Australian investors do not understand that. And so there's a lot of educational effort that I've been putting in over the last, I guess, 6-7 months to educate the Australian investors on what actually the potential here is. So long story short, I guess we are in a boat where we do need significant resources to build robotic systems. So it's not like, $200,000 that we need 1.5 million, but it is also significant potential because not everybody can do that in the garage and sort of compete with us, right? So we have 10 years of IP and technology that are not going to be reproduced by somebody in a garage with like 2 smart programmers and as Simon said, like just some smart programmers and a business plan. So yeah, I'm happy to go a bit more into details, but I think that's sort of like, I guess, a different story to Jeremy. I hope it will be successful at some point as well, but it's definitely a fight at this point in time.
No, look, sorry, I didn't mean not successful. I just know you've had a bit of a struggle from our conversations. I wanted someone to share.
No, all good, all good.
Andrew, you wanted to comment a bit on some of the things that have been said. I thought it'd be good to get Andrew's perspective back, given that you're on the finance side. Tell us a bit about kind of your thoughts and what you've heard.
Yeah, sure thing. And just to give a bit of perspective, we've just done 5 deals. We're about to finish a 6th, and we're looking for another 4 more within the next 2 or 3 months. So we're very hungry for deals, and in the next year, we're looking to do another 15. So we do see a lot of companies, and I personally really wish it was like America, and very inspired by your story, Jeremy. And I love reading on Twitter all these stories of people, getting that. And it's just really interesting from the Australian perspective. And obviously, I'm very much into the Silicon Valley culture. I read the stories every day. I read the books. I'm a big fanboy. And then, coming into the VC realm, I found there's quite a disconnect between the way Australian VCs normally work. And this isn't to say all of them. There's a couple of the VCs, which you can imagine at the top tier, that do take that sort of American methodology. But yeah, very much so, the vast majority of VCs that have the early stage venture capital limited partnership, the ESVC LP funds, they're very much, quite aggressive on lower valuations. And to be fair, I think that comes about because of all the precedents that are being set. You get companies coming along that have, completely in market. They've got enterprise level clients. Sometimes they've even got millions in revenue. And then, the valuations are really good. And then, someone comes in and pitches an idea, and, it seems like it's a great team. And, obviously the company that had a relatively low valuation but very high traction, people compare that. Then they sort of think, oh, well, we can't just offer this person with an idea the same valuation or the same check size as someone that has got millions in revenue and is basically de-risked. But look, I completely agree. I wish it was like the American experience, and they've proven historically that it has worked. There have been, you know, tremendous winners that have come out from that. But yeah, I think the local VC appetite is very different. And in some ways, a lot of people, particularly from America, would criticize Australian venture capitalists as not having a lot of venture. There's not a lot of risk appetite in the local environment. But I did want to help to explain, I think, why the environment's perhaps like this, because I see it as there's the precedents that have been set. There's just so many companies that are raising based off, you know, discounted cash flows, that have got revenue, that have got contracts. Revenue is going to continue coming in, and they're getting, you know, valuations on the low side. And then when someone else comes in with an idea, they're not going to be able to, you know, match up with that. So I thought I'd try to explain it from both sides. And I am a big fan of what's happening in the US, and I hope that we can get to that stage here as well.
So Andrew, time to reach out a helping hand to Yuxi, right, Yuxi? Sort out the next round. Michelle, I think I just wanted to check in too to see if you had any thoughts. And then what I'm going to do for the last couple of minutes is ask if anyone from the audience wants to share a story. So if you've got a story to share while Michelle's talking, put it in the chat and I'll call you out maybe just for a couple of minutes to share it as well.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with Andrew. I think it's all about risk and culture, and it's, you know, there's direct to revenue. Our investors in Australia are very direct to revenue focused, and it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because everyone knows that, and therefore they only go for investment when they've got revenue, and then that's the expectation of the investors, and then they lowball the valuation, then you can't get investment from anyone else except those same investors at that same stage. So it's kind of, and you know, we see this activity happen all the time. It's like, you know, you get a really good company that goes out to get investment here, and the investors are like, no, pass on this until you get to revenue, knowing full well that company can't make it to revenue without the investment, right? And then at the end point, they're like, oh, well, thank God I didn't invest in that. See, I was right, it didn't work. And it's like, well, that's ridiculous. It would have worked if you backed it, but you didn't back it, and therefore it kind of didn't work because you didn't back it. And so it's kind of, it's just this interesting landscape here. But one thing that I did want to raise, and it's something that people need to be aware of, is the profile of the investors that you get in your early rounds is incredibly important for subsequent raises. So if you're a company that thinks that they only need kind of 1 or 2 rounds, a seed round and maybe a Series A, then it doesn't matter so much. You kind of get, you know, potentially you can get sort of, you know, no-name investors on your cap table, and it's not so much of an issue. But I think when you start to look then at raising in the US, and we've had this experience ourselves, is kind of the first thing they look is who are the reputable investors in your previous rounds. And if you don't have one, it's actually really difficult. It's difficult to start that process in the later rounds. And so I think that's another thing that we kind of fail with here is we kind of try and grab it. We have to grab it whatever money's available to us, but it's not necessarily the right profile of money that's going to get us to the right valuation point or get us to the right kind of prototype of investor that we're going to need for subsequent rounds. And that can kind of bug you up later down the track as well. So it, you know, it is a systemic problem, and unless we kind of fix that whole, you know, the funding kind of need or pathway, what ends up happening is we're just going to lose all of the country's kind of sovereign capability to other countries. And it's been happening, you know, since the dawn of time, but it's going to continue to happen, and it's a massive lost opportunity for Australia, I think.
That's a really good point, Michelle. And you saw with Jeremy, with your companies that you went to the US with most of them, which from an Australian perspective is a shame. We saw also at Atlassian not even listing on the ASX. They went and listed on the NASDAQ. So it's a bit of a shame. The only other thing I thought I'd check, I didn't see anyone wants to share a story. So Simon, you haven't had much of a chance to weigh in on the discussion we've had so far. Do you have any further thoughts or anything you wanted to add to what you've heard here?
No, I think it's all very interesting to hear everyone's stories. And again, I sort of retrospectively kind of hopefully didn't leave everyone sort of like too despondent about what the opportunities are. I guess my perspective too a little bit is, and I was sort of wondering, I was waiting for the question, is that, well, if the big five are doing all this, why are the universities doing any AI research? And so the reality is that the universities have sort of actually the best experience at the moment in how to combat the big five. And so actually that's exactly what we're doing at the moment. We're choosing the innovation paths that don't require the big data centers, that don't require the big a lot of that backing, and actually that's a lot of the work that we're doing at the Institute, and actually a path that I've taken in a lot of my research, because I do think there's a way forward. In particular, there's a lot of really interesting work going forward on people are referring to it not as deep learning anymore, but deep priors. And so deep priors basically leverage just neural network architectures themselves, no data, nothing. And it's brand new. It's a whole Wild West that sort of is exploding in the last sort of 6 to 8, 9 months, really. And I could see a lot of innovation going on there. And in some ways, I think that is where there's a great play for Australia. The other thing I didn't hear a lot on too is our comparative advantages. So we can lament about the lack of venture capital, but what makes Australia special? Why would a venture capital invest here? What makes us have an advantage over other places? And I think there's a lot to be said. I think one thing, for instance, that Lucey kind of mentioned is that one of our biggest products here in Australia is access to talent. A lot of the engineers here don't understand how valuable they are. And I'm really surprised to hear local venture capital doesn't realize this, because it's happening. We're already starting to see this in Adelaide. Amazon Research has just set up here. Other companies are coming, and because there's a global search for talent. And that's something that I think Australian startups and companies should be on notice for, because the landscape's maybe going to change. And so how to plan for that and how to think about that. And so seeing what's happened overseas and thinking about that. So I guess my message is sort of twofold. One thing is that, yes, you can compete against the big data centers, but you have to think about, well, how and why. And the second thing is, in a way, I think still the value proposition in many ways is the talent. Australia's got unprecedented amounts of talent that are sort of untapped at the moment. And that's not always going to stay that way. And so what do we do about that? How do we and we'd love to give preference to Australian companies in that regard. And so I'd welcome discussions and further outreach in that regard, because I think there's a really good play to be had there.
Just to add to that, you know, when I was hiring at Analytic, which I mean, presumably it's gone up since then, this is like 5 years ago, we were having to pay at least 200K plus equity to brand new undergraduates just out of undergrad for the best ones. Because, you know, we were competing against Google and Facebook and all these, and Flash with Cash startups. So like, yeah, there was kind of everybody was talking about how they were setting up, like entrepreneurs were setting up remote development offices, like, and generally be wherever they happen to grow up. So it'd be like in Belarus or Ukraine or whatever. And so the Aussies who had, you know, remote development offices back in Melbourne were kicking ass because they could hire 3 or 4 times more people for the same price, and they were at least the same quality.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, Jeremy. And I think there's similar arguments made even at the PhD level kind of coming out. I think there's a whole landscape there that sort of, it's undervalued at the moment. And we used to joke, and I'll shut up after this, but we used to joke about real estate prices around the top AI schools. And we used to joke in the US, sort of Pittsburgh was extremely undervalued up until probably the last 3 or 4 years, because say if you try to buy a house at Stanford or Berkeley or MIT, it's just mind-boggling. And so I think a similar argument could be made for here. I mean, you've got much better weather here in Australia than any of the Northeast, but it's very, very undervalued. And I think when you're looking for opportunity, that's an opportunity that could be kind of pitched internationally, I think, that type of access to talent base like that.
Can I just mention one comment there, because I get really sensitive about this topic, is access to talent. The reason that talent is so expensive there is because it's amongst a really high performing, fully functioning ecosystem in which that talent has somewhere to go. Our talent is not, we have the talent here and we have the potential to leverage that talent for our own benefit, but I wouldn't want that talent to be seen as a resource for others to come in and kind of pillage that talent for their own, you know, like this is our problem. It's like, hey, we've got cheap talent. Hey, we've got amazing weather. And then everyone comes in and they're like, wow, it's like a, you know, it's like a market of this amazing stuff they can get cheap and free and take back and do whatever they want with. That's not what we want to develop here. We need to develop an ecosystem here that is fully functioning from start to finish. And it's kind of, and I know that's not what you're saying, Simon, by the way. I know you're saying that is our value proposition, that we have strong talent, and I totally agree with you. But I just think, you know, we need to work on the externalities of the ecosystem. And I would love if our talent were more highly valued here, because we have a fully functioning industry for them to move into.
Good point, Michelle.
Yeah, I guess Michael, I think that's a very good point, Michelle. I guess the thing is that 10, 20 years ago, what would have happened is with that talent, they would have left, which would have been a big issue. But what I'm noticing now is that I think we're actually even seeing a little bit is the talent is so highly prized, the companies are actually coming here. And that's what's potentially going to change, because they're looking for that talent. So I mean, I may be wrong, but that's the difference I'm seeing. And it'd be horrible, but to sort of see innovative Australian companies sort of squeezed out of that. So I'd love to be involved in thinking and discussions around how we can sort of make sure that that doesn't happen. And I really agree with your point there, Michelle.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Simon. Look, we're 2 minutes over, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I don't want to share, Simon, it was a good call out. We should connect more as a community. I don't want to just shoot out a blanket email with everyone's email addresses, because I hate it when people do that to me. So what I'm going to suggest to everyone is please connect with me on LinkedIn, Evan Shellshear. You'll find me easily, and I will connect you to individuals that you want to talk to from this call. I'm happy to facilitate an introduction. I think it's really important, but I do want to respect everyone's privacy, and that you don't just want to get your email address shared out with everyone. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll help you facilitate that discussion. I'll connect you with the right people and make sure that you're chatting. Thank you, everyone, for the discussion today. Absolutely awesome. I absolutely loved it. Really good. We've been recording this. I'll put it up on YouTube afterwards, and I'll try and shoot out the link to everyone as well afterwards, so you can recheck any of the themes that we touched upon. Thank you all. Have a fantastic Friday afternoon, an awesome weekend, and I hope to see you again in another one of these events. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.
See you all later.